Hello there, and welcome to today's edition of Forum Focus. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt has only been in the position for just over a month as the administration is now kind of coming to the end of its first 30 days and already has announced several changes to the White House briefing room. It started with what they're describing as a new media seat given to independent media on a rotating basis. Although the irony was that on the very first day of this new media seat, it ended up going to a legacy media outlet. And then just recently, the announcement that the White House press pool would be decided by the White House press office and not by the WHCA, the White House Correspondents Association, as it has been for as long as we can remember, really. Let's discuss some of these kind of recent developments with the White House press office, specifically the access with someone who knows it well, and that is White House reporter and columnist Brian Karem. Brian, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you with us.
Always a pleasure to be here, Wyatt. Here to
Um,
serve, bro.
So let's just start out with kind of the changes that we are seeing here, but specifically because this administration has really been painting itself as the most transparent administration in American history. I know you have some strong feelings on that, but what do you make of kind of these announcements specifically that Caroline Leavitt has been unveiling in recent days?
Well, I think it's accurate to say they're painting themselves as the most transparent, but when you paint something, you usually cover up the cracks, and that's what they're doing is covering up. They're not really transparent. They're obfuscating the facts. And it's hard to look at her as a press secretary. I think of her more as a pep secretary. I mean, she comes out and does the pep rally for the president, but the facts are few and far between. She, on the whole, has been out in front of the press once, twice a week at most. Today's announcement, and by the way, this is day 37, just 37 days into it. Donald Trump has declared himself the leader of not only the United States, but of course, he wants to take over Canada, Mexico, buy Greenland, go to the canal and take the Panama Canal back. And at the same time, he's also in our country made himself the head of the Kennedy Center. So the Kennedy Center Performing Arts today in a gaggle, he declared what he'd like to have happen in sporting events, in golf. He wants to dictate pretty much all of life in the US. That's not really what a president does. So his move today, he decided that yesterday in court, the Associated Press, he had kicked out of the pool. And for those who don't know, if you have a press pass, it gets you access to the campus, right? You can
Yeah.
be at the White House, so you can see, like you have the press briefings. The pool is a different matter. The protective pool, was formed by the White House Correspondents Association because we came to an agreement many years ago with the president that whenever the president is working and on the job, the press should be around him in some form or fashion, except for some very minor details. So when he's available for the public, there is the press pool there. And you have to be a member of that pool, you have to be a large organization that reaches many millions of people. And at the same time, you've got to be able to pay to play. So if you're
Yeah.
traveling with a president, you're paying for your spot on Air Force One, you're paying for your meals, you're paying for your lodging for the
Yeah.
benefit of flying with the president. So he comes out today and says that he can manipulate the pretty easy the pool that's there when he's in town. So anybody who wants to be in town, he says, I'm going to determine who that is. Now, he's also said he's going to do that with the travel pool. But here's the thing: if you can't pay to play, you ain't going to play. So it'll probably still say the travel pool will still be the largest organizations, probably because no one else can afford the expense of traveling with the president. But
Yeah.
if you are covering the president at the White House, it will be up to him to determine who gets to ask him questions because he hasn't come out to the whole press yet. And he won't because he wants to control his access. He appears to be more transparent by being in front of the pool. But when you handpick who's covering you, that's like being a quarterback in a football league and going, you know what? I'll pick who the defense is on the other side I'm going to throw against. Doesn't work that way.
And just lastly here before we go to break, we only have about 20 seconds, but do you think that there will be kind of, as you say, this appearance of transparency, or will even that start to disappear? And I'm asking that because we have seen Trump even come to the press briefing room, something that Joe Biden didn't do at all.
Amen. Well, Trump didn't do it until the last year of his first administration, and that was during COVID. He hasn't been there, I don't think, maybe once. Biden went there one time. I don't think Trump's been there yet. New administration. So we'll see. I don't think it's transparent. I think in the end, after the next 100 days, it won't be even more.
Okay, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are joined once again by Brian Karem, who you might remember seeing some of his reporting, especially over the course of the first term of the Trump administration. There were a lot of kind of famous moments of him and President Trump. You asked him, I think, Brian, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was something along the lines of why won't you concede the election in kind of the final months of that campaign. So I think people even hearing some of your commentary in the last segment are picking up on the fact that you're not too complimentary towards Donald Trump. How might this announcement today, but also just the administration's kind of press and media policy moving forward, impact not only journalists like yourself, but as you said, people like the AP who have been historically very nonpartisan, who it seems as if now they're even being subject to attacks from this administration?
Well, yeah, because Donald Trump decreed it a fact that it's the Gulf of Mexico is now the Gulf of America. And I'm sorry, but you don't get to decree what the facts are just because you're president. You work for us. We don't work at your behest. The idea of saying that it's a privilege to cover the president, no, it's our responsibility according to the Constitution of the United States. It's the president's privilege to be there by the grace of 77 million voters, but he's still a hired hand. He still
Yeah.
works for us. And at the end of the day, the press, you know, it's not that I dislike him, and it doesn't matter if I do. My job, as Ben Bagdickian once told me when I was a young reporter, he's a former editor at the Washington Post. He said, Brian, it doesn't matter. You know, your loyalty isn't to you. It isn't to your career. It isn't to your editor or the organization you work for. At the end of the day, your responsibility is to the public. That's why we're there. And if we don't push back, if we don't push and ask truth to power, there's no point in us being there. We're just propagandists otherwise.
Can I ask you too, Brian, because people like Jim Acosta, for example, who, I mean, it's not entirely clear, but either decided not to take the later slot or was let go from CNN. A bunch of MSNBC anchors like Joy Reid and Katie Phang have been let go. Is this a sign, too, that maybe some of the leadership at some of these networks are starting to cave in to what it is that Donald Trump is looking for?
Well, if you take a look at the fact that Jeff Bezos, the editor of the USA Today as well, the Los Angeles Times, all of them have bowed a knee to Donald Trump, settling lawsuits. The owners of the large corporations that supply most of the media to the national media to the United States has gone all in with Donald Trump. I do not recognize that briefing room when I walk into it anymore. I've never seen a time where reporters start out their questions to the press secretary of the United States or to the president by complimenting them and then asking a question that matters not at all. Today, the president has a gaggle and somebody's asking him, when are the Philadelphia Eagles going to visit the White House? Really? That's the best you
Well,
could
and
come
I
up with?
Yeah, and I think people too are. I mean, you're mentioning a number of examples. I'm thinking to videos I've seen even of reporters from overseas coming in. I think there was an example of one reporter from India who asked the president a question, and then the president replied by saying, "I like her, more of her." And so, I think it's kind of reflecting this interesting dynamic that's at play right now. When we're looking at it, though, as a reporter there, because for people who don't know, I mean, I saw you during the inauguration in the White House, and going from Joe Biden, who had kind of a much more kind of traditional press policy, and I know you've said before even too that you're not a fan of his communications operation, but going from someone like him to Donald Trump and just really two completely different narratives, how do you as a reporter kind of balance covering those two different things?
You do your job. You push back, you ask questions, truth to power. Doesn't matter who's in the White House, your stance shouldn't change. You have to be the immovable object or the irresistible force, whichever metaphor you want to choose there. But at the end of the day, you have a job to do. And if you're not going to do it, get out. Because if you're going to kowtow to whoever is in office, you're not doing anybody any favors. You're not doing yourself a favor, although you may think you are. Gee, I have access to power. This is really cool. That lasts about 30 seconds. Then why are you there? Do your job. It doesn't help out the president because the president needs to see what people are actually thinking. despite whatever it is they believe they want to hear at the time. And finally, you're not helping out the public because the public has a right and a need to know what's going on. And if you're not pushing hard, if you're not asking the questions, then you shouldn't be there. And I know some people say, hey, we should just boycott this administration. No, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stand in that room until you yank me out of it. My job is to be there. My job is to put your feet to the fire. I'll happily do it. That's what I signed up for.
All right, we will leave it there. Brian Karam, thank you.
Always a pleasure.
After the break, we're going to talk to a former Trump advisor who advised Donald Trump as recently as the primary campaigns on some of these changes and specifically what it all means. Be sure to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Forum Focus. Before the break, you heard from White House correspondent Brian Karam, who was detailing what it might mean from a White House reporter's perspective about some of these changes that are being unveiled to the press policy in the White House. Joining us now to discuss a little bit more of this is former political campaign advisor Stefan Mihailu, who's actually in Buffalo this evening. So, Stefan, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, glad to be here.
So let's just start out. As I said before the break, I was talking to Brian Karam, who I know I've talked to both of you before in the same show, and you fall on kind of opposite ends of the political spectrum, but it's interesting to get both of your takes. And so I'm a little bit curious as to why, from your perspective, someone like Karoline Leavitt in the White House would want to come out and make this change so that it goes from the White House pool being decided by the WHCA to the White House press office itself. People like Brian Karam say it's because they are not transparent and they want to do everything they can to control it. What would be your response to that?
My response is look at the difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration about answering reporters' questions. Donald Trump brings reporters into the Oval Office on a regular basis, 30 minutes at a time, 60 minutes at a time, and answers all of their questions, something President Biden did not do before. Now, I'm a former journalist. I'm a staunch supporter of the First Amendment. I've been on both sides of the issue. As a
Mhm.
journalist and as a political operative, I think it's a brilliant move by the Trump White House. They're not limiting free speech at all, quite the opposite. And I find it humorous that a lot of the mainstream media have their knickers in a twist, all up in arms about this when they're just angry that they specifically won't be next to the president, but the press pool is widening. I give them credit for that.
And I mean, when you look at what, because I mean, you brought up the Biden administration, and that's interesting because obviously Joe Biden did not take many press conferences. When he did, by all accounts, they didn't go very well. But even you're seeing the likes of Newsmax and Fox News networks that generally lean conservative not being supportive of these policies either. Is that a sign that this isn't, a political thing and it's just people want things to keep on going? Because even Donald Trump's press pool in the 2016 administration was still decided by the WHCA, and things seem to go fine that administration. Why change it?
Because you want to control the messaging, period. As a professional in marketing and communications, I was Vivek Ramaswamy's spokesman as deputy comms director for his campaign. At the end of the day, you super serve the principal. Your job is to get the messaging out of the principal. And in Caroline Leavitt's case, the principal is the president of the United States. So if I were in her shoes, I would do exactly the same thing. Your only job is to super serve the president of the United States and get his messaging out. And again, I would make the argument that he has a wide open press policy. He has reporters in the Oval Office all the time. He answers all of their questions, something Joe Biden physically and mentally was not able to do.
And switching to this issue of that AP kind of reporter who refused to call it the Gulf of America, instead called it the Gulf of Mexico. And then, of course, the White House retracted their access from the White House press pool. Is that wanting to make a political statement, or does the White House, generally speaking, just feel that strongly from your perspective over this one issue? I mean, why just not? I mean, it's in kind of accordance with some of their editorial guidelines. So why make such a defiant stance on this?
Look at the Biden administration. I'll go back to the previous 4 years. When they banned the New York Post, a conservative leading newspaper in the United States, no one said a peep about it. But all of a sudden, Donald Trump is changing the rules. The Associated Press is freaking out. And then everyone's saying, oh, wait a minute, they're against the First Amendment. Well, no one said anything when it happened to a so called conservative paper in the New York Post. And all of a sudden, the Associated Press is up in arms. I think the Trump administration has been one of the most open, honest, and transparent presidential administrations in modern media times. And the mainstream media cannot control how they cover it. They're losing control and they're sucking their thumbs in the fetal position about it. I give the Trump administration a lot of credit.
We have to go to break here in a second, but just why specifically do you? Because I mean, we can talk about the Biden administration and how they weren't transparent, but why do they feel so strongly about this issue of the Gulf of America?
That's the name of it. That's exactly what the President Trump, called it via executive order. And even though mainstream media does not like the messaging, their job is to report facts. And the fact is, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has labeled it the Gulf of America. That's a fact. It is a news reporter's job, and I did it job for 20 years, for almost 2 decades. Your job is to report facts with zero bias. They don't like the messenger. It's not about the message. They don't like the messenger of President Trump. So they're going to protest. They're going to
Okay,
whine.
Stefan, we'll pick it up right after the break. Sorry, got to go to break. We'll pick it right up. Stay with us. Welcome back. Joining me once again is Stefan Mihailu, former political campaign advisor, spokesman to Vivek Ramaswamy during his 2024 presidential run. Stefan, appreciate you being back with us. Before the break, we were talking about this issue of the AP reporter and the AP in general, who has now been banned from the White House press pool, and then for essentially refusing to call it the Gulf of America and calling it the Gulf of Mexico in some of its political reporting that they were doing. I want to ask you specifically, because if you look to the AP's editorial guidelines, they say it boils down to the fact that, I guess you can call it kind of the international organization who declares what bodies of water are called, still references it as the Gulf of Mexico, and that's why they reference it as that in their political reporting as well. I'm just kind of, the AP obviously has huge readership. Brian Karem said that it is kind of a privilege to be able to cover the White House, and that the AP wasn't doing anything to go outside of having this privilege. So from your perspective, again, just why are they zoning in specifically on this issue? Is it not kind of creating for an unnecessary distraction?
You're 100% correct. In politics and media, you got to be very smart and judicious on picking and choosing your battles. And no question, they just don't like the fact that Donald Trump is the messenger about labeling this body of water the Gulf of America. They can easily do that in all of their newspaper reporting. Their reporting is supposed to be about facts. The fact is, Donald Trump has issued an executive order and he's labeling it the Gulf of America. So call it that. And I think it's just garbage that they're relying on, oh, this international guidebook baloney. They're doing it because it's President Trump. The mainstream media is known for being extremely left leaning and biased, and they're just trying to pick a fight with President Trump. And it makes no sense whatsoever.
Do you think that moving forward, President Trump, because of course he got a lot of criticism from the mainstream media, but a lot of his closest advisors advocate for him to do that. I mean, if you look to, I was watching one of Tucker Carlson's documentaries called The Art of the Surge, where it was showing the behind the scenes of the campaign. And you saw the likes of, Jason Miller and stuff encouraging him to go on these interviews on places like CNN, on Fox and whatever, because he understands, I guess, that kind of this confrontation creates for an environment where it does get a lot of clicks. So is this something that Donald Trump likes to participate in, again, as people often kind of cite?
I think it's just smart when you have the facts on your side, when you have such a groundswell of public support. Absolutely. I would encourage President Trump to keep doing what he's doing, not a thing differently. There is no better spokesperson for President Trump than President Trump himself. So I would strongly encourage him, keep on having press conferences in the Oval Office. You cannot cheat an honest man. He tells the truth, whether the mainstream media wants to hear it or not. And he's got the support of the American people. And if you look at polling, you'll see that President Trump is off the charts. His polling and his popularity is very positive. Whereas the left-leaning mainstream media, they're in the gutter right now. I'm half embarrassed to admit that I was a reporter for almost 20 years. So to their peril, the mainstream media can keep picking fights with President Trump. and the American people will continue to turn them off and not read their publications and solely focus on the messaging straight from the White House.
And I mentioned in the introduction that you're joining us from Buffalo tonight, which I mentioned because, of course, of what's been happening between Canada and the US as of recently. You saw, of course, at some of the hockey games, there was a Canadian singer who changed the lyrics of the national anthem in protest of what's happening there. I guess, is this another example of something that Donald Trump is doing in effort to make a political point, given you have a lot of economists saying that these tariffs are going to raise the cost of living for the average American family by $900 a year?
I think President Trump is spot on when it comes to tariffs, whether it's Canada or any other nation across the world. Whatever you charge America, that's what we are going to charge you. And as a kid going to Buffalo Sabres hockey games, the Canadian national anthem was the second anthem that I learned. Of course, singing both anthems at hockey games. I knew the words as a kid, of course, to the Star Spangled Banner as well. There may be bad blood in the media between the United States and Canada, and your
Mm.
pundits and politicians talking about it all the time. But our neighbors to the north, they are our friends, they are our allies, and that will never change, regardless of who's in the White House.
Okay, we will leave it there. Stefan Mihailu, thank you so much as always.
You got it.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Forum Focus. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember to, of course, stay informed, stay engaged, and get involved. And we had a lot of conversations about what kind of is shaping the political discourse both in Canada and the United States. It's easy to get caught up in these echo chambers, so to speak. So again, remember to stay informed, and we'll see you next time right here on Forum Focus.